Hi there, I'm Eric Wordweaver Sjerven, Gothi of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas, and I would love to welcome you to The Raven's Call. This is a show where I ramble on about different heathen-related subjects, just kind of whatever strikes my fancy, sets my mind on fire at the time. Big UPG warning at the beginning of these, like always. This is just how I see heathenry. It's not necessarily reflecting greater heathenry, if there is such a thing, nor is it even necessarily reflective of my tribe members' individual views. This is my take on heathenry, and I'm very much a middle-of-the-road kind of guy. Not a fluffy bunny neo-pagan, not a hardcore recon. I'm somewhere in the middle. So, if you guys enjoy what you see in these videos, please hit like, subscribe, all that down below. Feel free to share the videos around. I've got folks that are asking me, hey, is it okay if I share your video on my tribe page, on my kindred page? Dude, that's what they're out there for, all right? I do these videos so you guys can share them and experience them. If there's somebody you think would enjoy these things, share it out. You don't have to ask my permission ahead of time. If you want to share the Facebook link from Wordweaver Productions, be my guest. Share it around. All it is a link to the YouTube. But it is handy dandy there on Facebook, ready to go. And you are welcome to share it around. Doesn't bother me one bit. So, another thing to be looking out for here in the upcoming weeks is that I'm doing an interview today with the guy over at Flatline to Beatline. That's Flatline to Beatline. It's a cool podcast where he interviews all kinds of different people in the pagan circles. I know Jesse over at Midgard's Musings did an interview with him a while back. It's actually how I got referred to the roster and whatnot. So thanks to Jesse for the shout out there. Thanks to Flatline to Beatline for even having me on the show. And keep an eye out for that. It'll be coming out before long. If I can find a link to it when it goes live, I know he'll send me the link to it when it goes live, but still, it'll aggregate on my podcast feed because I subscribe to him. You guys should too. I'll share it out on Wordweaver Productions so that you guys can see that. Okay? So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's subject. Today, I got to give a shout out to a friend of mine here in the East Texas area, Amelia. Amelia posted something up on her Facebook group the other day that really got me thinking, largely because I didn't realize there was a disconnect. I didn't realize people didn't necessarily get it per se. And that is going to be the subject of Hof, Hall, and the differences there. Hof or temple and a hall, great hall, meat hall kind of thing. Now, the question she posited up on her page was, how people felt about having a public hall in the area to, public temple is how she phrased it initially, to have people gather together. And this is something that I thought was, okay, cool, good conversation starter. Personally, my stance on it is that a public temple is not necessarily something that I'm cool with. I'll explain why here in just a little bit. But a public hall, I think, would be kind of cool. And I've talked about that a little bit here on the group before, as far as why, but I haven't sat down and codified it in a video here. So we're going to talk about that here real quick. All right. First thing we need to do is kind of define terms. Now, you're going to hear the term Hof used periodically within heathen circles. The reason for that is it's an old term for a temple building, a building utilized for religious purposes, used for ritual, usually an enclosure, and they tended to have a certain layout as far as being a long building like most of the longhouses were, with a ritual center focused around one end of the building and then room for people further back. There was the circular, it mimics kind of the V in the concentric circle kind of layout as far as a barrier to set up the sacred space and then an actual ritual space in the middle. There's some other trappings that you can do with an internal Hof like that, but as far as a historical basis, this is kind of what I've seen in the digs and the archaeological finds. So really, really cool, but the idea is it's an enclosed space that's used for ritual purposes, what some would call a temple. Now, temple is not really a word that shows up in the heathen vernacular. It's not inappropriate, though. It's just simply a different culture. And the term temple is utilized across multiple cultures now. So it's not necessarily a taboo thing by any means. You can call it a temple. That's fine. It's a matter of vernacular at that point. Whatever vernacular works for you and your tribe, good on you. Not my hall, not my call. So the Hof is the term that is modernly used for this kind of a space. It is a term that has historical basis. Now, are we using it in the modern terms exactly how it was used back then? Probably not. It is definitely correlate to the ancient Hofs and the modern Hofs, but a lot of times modern Hofs will take on shapes and designs that are not reflective of the classic Hof, just simply because that's just the way that it goes. We evolve with time. We have to work with what spaces we have. And so a lot of times people will use like prefab buildings. You'll see these out here, like the prefab sheds that you can put up on a slab or on blocks. And these are really popular for that because it's prefab. You can pay for it, make payments on it, slap it on a piece of land, and boom, Hof. There you go. What makes it a Hof, though? Well, what makes it a Hof is simply the fact that it is dedicated to ritual purposes. I don't know if you can hear the vehicles in the background. That's annoying. But it is dedicated to ritual purposes. It is intended to be a ritual space. It is set up specifically for the purpose of doing ritual and engaging in religious activities. Now, the religious activity part is key because you are dealing with our interactions with the divine at this point. And if you've been following my channel at all, you know how I kind of feel about this. I see interactions with the divine being more of an insular thing, more of a tribe or hearth-centric kind of thing. Our interactions with the gods are very important as far as exchanging luck and sharing our well with the gods. This is why I'm not necessarily down with the idea of a public Hof, as it were, simply because I don't do ritual with the public. I don't do ritual with in open settings for the most part. There are times that I will, but it's kind of calculated, and it's a calculated risk kind of thing. I'm not going to sit and center any of my tribal main festivals around truly open events. Even our open events, as we call them, that simply means we're opening it up to our surrounding folk community, and the people that come out are still invite only. And so that's a key thing there. I'm guarding our well, because when you set up to do ritual, you are laying it bare. You are opening up the well and the energy centers for your tribe and really putting yourself at risk. You're sharing weird with everybody that's there in a major, major way. And if you have a negative element that works its way in there, that can taint your ritual. If you've got somebody in there who's not right, who's not respecting it, who's bringing in ill energies, who's a drain on luck, it is going to taint your ritual, and in some ways may actually ruin the ritual. Just depends. At most, it may cause your ritual to go inert, and then you end up not having any effect at all, which is unfortunate when that occurs. But it does occur from time to time because we take a misstep, we miscalculate something. You really hope that you don't do anything that will offend the gods and massively impact your tribe's standing with the gods. And that's something that you run a bigger risk with when you open up to the public, when you're allowing other people to come in that aren't vetted by your tribe, that aren't known entities to you. Now, is that to say you can't have guests at your tribal rituals? No, it's not saying that at all. It's simply saying I would advise you to be picky about who you let into your rituals and be kind of guarded as to who you engage in ritual with. Like I said, I'm not a fan of public rituals. So the idea of a public Hof to me, when we're talking about interaction with the divine, interaction with the gods and goddesses, I do not necessarily like the idea of an open Hof because it pulls in way too many variables that you don't have any control over. Now, I know a lot of the back and forth that I saw on it seems to be some misconceptions about the religiosity of this scenario, and there was almost a fear of exclusivity in it, and it's not necessarily that. It's not like, you guys know, I'm one of those guys that is, I don't feel it's appropriate for me to say who can and can't worship the gods. That's not the point, all right? I don't have that kind of power. It would be audacious of me to even attempt to dictate who can worship the gods and who cannot. That's not the point. The idea is that you've got your Innengard, your inner circle, and your tribe, your hearth, your family. I know Innengard is a modern usage of a term that does not necessarily, it's not historically based, but the social patterns that it represents did occur back then. They just weren't codified because they didn't need to be. This is a modern term we use to codify a social phenomenon that we have observed through lore and archaeological digs, etc., etc., etc. Plus, we can just see it playing out in the world around us. So we understand that's how it works. At least from my point of view. The Innengard is paramount. That is what you're trying to protect, because you are laying bare your Innengard. It's weird, you're well, and you are exchanging with the gods and goddesses. You're exchanging luck with them. You are giving offering to them. And I'm not one to invite outsiders to that unless they are people that I consider to be friends of my tribe, people that I know and have known for a while. If you get an invite to one of my rituals, it means something. And so that's something that I don't think... If you have an open Hof, you're basically talking about it like a church, wherein it's open to anybody to come in. And you're not saying that anybody can come and worship the gods. What you're saying is anybody can come and partake in your ritual space. Anybody can come in, and you don't have any control over whether these people respect that space, whether they observe the taboos and rules that help to keep that space sacred, that help to keep that space protected. You don't have any of those stopgaps because it's an open Hof. That leads to some problems. I know churches that I have interacted with have had some problems with that, but generally speaking, it tends to go okay. And in most cases, I'm sure that it would go fine, because most of the heathens that I know that would reach out to try and do this would be all right. Unless, of course, you run across some of the more racist bent or some of the more hate-filled bent. Then it can be an issue, and you have a problem chasing them off because you've established a public venue. And so things get a little dodgy there. There are legal avenues you can go to do that, because you are still probably setting it up on private property. It's still probably a private entity, a private facility that you are simply allowing anybody to come into. Still, what grounds you have... you got to be really clear about your rules and everything when people come in, and then if they violate the rules, then you can ask them to leave, etc., etc., etc. It's private property. Ultimately, you can ask anybody to leave that you don't want to be there. But then we're not really talking about a truly open Hof at that point. Now, this is just discussing the Hof side of things. Do I necessarily think that an open Hof is a good idea? No, I really don't. I've seen a lot of people that have tried to work towards this. They'll make a tribal Hof, and then they'll kind of open it up with the idea that, heathens all across the area need to be able to come to a place to worship. I don't get that, because I don't really think that it's necessary. You need your space. That is your tribe's space that you seed with your tribe's energy, or at least your hearth's energy. And that is a place where you go to connect with the gods and goddesses. That needs to be attuned to your energies. Opening it up to the public dilutes those energies and does not establish the weird anchor that you would necessarily need to have that kind of a connection. Now, just dealing in masses, yeah, you can totally charge a space with this is where the gods are worshipped. I mean, you look at great temples like the temple at Uppsala back in the day, and there is some precedent for larger, more open temples. But that was a special occasion kind of thing. Even the lore surrounding the Hof at Uppsala, it was like once every 9 years kind of thing, not on a normal basis. This is not where Godis or chieftains did their bloats and their rituals on a routine basis. Those were done on their properties, their space, with their people. There's plenty of references in the lore to like Alphabloat. When Alphabloat's going on, even kings were turned away from the door because Alphabloat was seen as an internal thing, a very insular, family-oriented thing. That wasn't even necessarily a tribal level thing. That was a hearth-oriented thing. And kings were said to have come to the door to visit and were turned away because it's Alphabloat and they couldn't come in. So there is basis for this it is insular in nature, but sometimes it's okay to be insular. I mean, you're talking about guarding your weird, guarding your innengarth. And I think that's extremely important. So I've got some stuff on the whole well and everything coming up here as soon as I can kind of get it codified and into video that I think will help to kind of lay some more groundwork for this. But essentially, the gist of what I'm getting here is that the religious side of things I see as being very tribal-based, very hearth-based, kindred-based, whatever you might have it. And I think you need to be pickier than a public venue. Like, I wouldn't use a public Hof to do ritual. I really don't think that would be appropriate. Even if it was like, hey, you guys can come and use this space. Like, local universal Unitarian churches are open to just about anybody, and anybody can come out there and use their space. I don't use those spaces. I never have. I've been invited out before. If I were like in a city where that was the only option that I had, yeah, okay, you work with what you've got. If they'll let you use the space and respect what you need in your boundaries, then yeah, cool, totally. As long as you're getting your needs met and you are comfortable with the guards in place regarding your innengarth and your well, then it's your call. It's your hall, your call kind of deal. I'm not one that uses those spaces. I don't like the idea of utilizing ritual spaces that are mired with other people's energies, that are kind of muddied. I'm lucky in that I have procured my own property and I can work with my land and establish something here. Not everybody's got that. Most people don't have that. People living in apartment complexes have to work with the space that they have. They may be doing something in their own little apartment. If you've got a tribe that is established, finding a hall may not necessarily be a bad thing. It's nice. Why would you want a Hof? What would be the benefit to a Hof? Well, that's pretty simple. The ability to do ritual in any kind of weather is really nice. As is during our not summer months, when it's rainy or when it's cool out. I'll call it cool. Twyla will call it cold, and because we have different tolerances when it comes to temperature. But that's an important thing to take into account, because while I may be comfortable in an outside space doing ritual, she may not. And if she's not, other members of my tribe may not be comfortable in that space. Now, usually we can come to some kind of a middle ground on it, some kind of a compromise as far as how long we spend out there, etc., etc. We'll go down there to do the ritual itself, and then we'll come back up and maybe go inside for some of the other festivities and so on. That's just one of those things that you've got to think about it and make it work for your people and your tribe. If I had a Hof, a dedicated building for my temple, then it wouldn't matter what the temperature was. It would not matter what the weather was, because a torrential downpour means that we have to turn ourselves back inside, either wait for a break in the rain to go down to our vey and do our rituals then, or do our rituals in the rain, not favorable, or we utilize my internal, like in my house ritual space, which does work, but not as well. Not as well. I'm not a fan of doing it that way. For hearth-oriented things, yes, totally. But as far as like doing tribe-level interactions with the gods and goddesses and whatnot, I prefer using a vey or a dedicated ritual space like that. Now, I have known some individuals who have dedicated rooms in their house to serve as their Hof. That's a thing that you can do. You can go through and set aside, like say you've got a den that you don't use for anything. That's a fantastic space to set aside and utilize as a Hof. Say you've got a large basement. That could be a space. If you've got extra bedrooms that you don't use for anything else, that could be a space. It depends on the spatial needs of your hearth, tribe, kindred, whatever space you're working in, whatever population numbers you're working with. Make those spaces work for you, and I think that you'll find that you can get your needs met. Now, there is another building that I do think would serve well having a more public face, and that's a hall, a great hall, or a mead hall, as it would be referred to. Now, a mead hall is more of a social gathering kind of place. I prefer the term great hall because a mead hall makes it sound like it's only for drinking. that is largely what goes on there. It's a gathering place. It's like the longhouse in the center of the smaller houses where you would gather as a tribe, as a community, and share camaraderie, share meals, and share drink, and share stories and time. It's a social gathering place. I think very much opening those up to the public as a community center kind of setup would be appropriate. I think that it would benefit very much having a more open face to a community center kind of thing, where you can teach classes, where you can gather and do study groups, where you can have TOEFL tournaments, where you can have story night or scald nights where people will write poetry and come up and share their poetry, where you can do readings from the lore or from the sagas or from, different poems that people have written, whatever. You can use that space for so many things as long as that's what it's dedicated to. Notice that there is an absence of religiosity in this. Again, I feel like sharing the religious side of things with the general public is an ill fit. Now, like I said before, I have done some large-scale rituals before with individuals in a public setting, in a public place that was dedicated for that. And I have got some decent experiences, no amazing experiences, but decent experiences. And then I've got some bad experiences, like very bad experiences. I was part of some rituals in more of a public setting before where I went away feeling very, very uncomfortable with how things turned out, because that tribe's particular aesthetic and how they chose to do this particular ritual I felt was inappropriate for a public setting, and I felt very uneasy with it. It was not something that I was pleased with, and it was not something that I walked away feeling energized. It left kind of a negative taste. I've seen things, especially up in the public areas of like Lightning Across the Plains back when that was a thing, where people did not respect the public ritual space. 95% of the people did. It wasn't a problem. But there were still those outliers that when they made a splash, they made a big splash. And so, again, I'm not super comfortable with public ritual spaces because of that. I would not like for something like that to happen in my own ritual space, that I focus on my exchange with my tribe and the gods. So I don't necessarily feel like a temple or a Hof is appropriate, but this mead hall idea, this great hall idea, where you create kind of a cultural community center that's centered around heathen crafts, heathen arts, all of these things, camaraderie, where meetups can be held, all of those things, fantastic. I love the idea. I think it's really cool, really groovy. I would like to see those kind of things pop up. Now, I've only got limited resources, and I imagine most of you do the same. And so given the choice between doing a public great hall and doing a private Hof for my tribe, I'm going to err on the side of the private Hof. This is as far as I go. This and my meetup group, East Texas Heathens, this is as far as I go as far as reaching out to the public and sharing my heathenry with the public. My heathenry is very much a personal thing, and it is something that I guard our well very closely. I feel like it's my job as Gothi and chieftain of my tribe to guard our luck, to guard our well, and to protect those ritual spaces and so on. So I'm not going to err on the side of a public great hall when I could turn my focus to my tribe and my immediate folk community and support them better there. I feel like my efforts are better placed in those settings. Is this going to be true for everybody? No. There's going to be people who don't really have tribe or hearth or kindred and who are trying to build community in their area that have the expendable cash to do these things. Cool. I'd love to see your projects. I'd love to see what you do with it. Everybody does things a little bit differently. Not my hall, not my call kind of thing, especially when it's your literal hall. You do you, that kind of thing. And I really think that some people are going to, in the coming years, do some really cool things with this. If I was given the option to go to a public Hof for a public ritual, I am most likely going to abstain. I am most likely going to step down, simply because I do not necessarily know anybody that's going to be there. There are people that will be there that I don't know. Let me put it that way. And I don't want to share weird with them, because if they taint the ritual and bring in a drain on the luck, or they taint the ritual, they taint the luck, things go bad and we end up crossways with the gods because of a ritual that ended up being offensive in the long run. I don't want to be a part of that, because that brings back ill will to my tribe and damages our relationship with the gods, and that is my priority. My priority is to protect my tribe and my hearth with our relationship to the gods. Now, spirituality kind of things, that varies and that's different, because you're dealing with the profane space. When you're talking about, a Hof is that space where you change the profane to the sacred. It's the spot where the waters of the profane and the waters of the sacred mesh, and they become this in-between space, this permeable membrane, which fans of my channel will know I'm big on my permeable membranes. And that is something that needs to be taken care of. It needs to be doctored. It needs to be protected. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong with that if you're not careful. And so that's why I think that needs to be carefully protected and carefully dealt with, so as to ensure that it is what it needs to be in the long run. So, but a public hall versus a Hof, a public hall, a mead hall, a great hall, that's different. That's not sacred space. That's all profane. That is all of the not sacred. That is all here in Midgard, and it is ours to do with as we please. So you can do anything you want to with that space. If you want to do ancestor stuff, which deals with the profane world, just the spiritual side of the profane world, I can see that being appropriate there. If you want to do Vatir stuff, a little bit less, simply because the Vatir like to stay in unworked areas. They like to stay in areas that are not clear-cut, that are not, worked property, worked land. That's more the realm of your Husvitir. So Husvitir stuff in there, yeah, absolutely. You may even get a separate entity to take up space in there that is the Hof spirit. That may be, not Hof spirit, but the Hall spirit. I really still think it's your Husvitir that gets to sit on a big throne in the big hall and be big dog for a little while. It's an opportunity to show honor to your Husvitir outside of just the house, because all of your worked property is the domain of the Husvitir. And so including a great hall like that would give them an opportunity to sit on their own high seat and be honored therein. If I were to put in a great hall out here, I would set up a specific high seat for the Husvitir, and honors would be given to them by all guests who came in. That's me. That's the way I would go about things. So if it's not necessarily on your property, if you're working with property that's, like if you're renting a space, then the rules can vary, and you can have a separate spirit that takes up residence in the Great Hall there. Now, because if you look at things, there's a difference between a Hof and a hall. If you look at some of the sagas and stuff too, because you will see things referred to as, okay, you've got like the temple at Uppsala, which is a Hof, which is a ritual space dedicated to the purpose of interacting with the gods and goddesses. There's references to Hofs where they will have the three statues to Odin, Freyr, and Thor set up in there. There's references to Hofs, though they're not always called that. Frequently it's translated into temple if you're reading the English translations, and it's almost always through a Christian viewpoint, so they translate that to just generalized pagan temple. And so, because they're pulling the statues out of there and burning them and desecrating them and things like that. But there's also references to halls, because if you look at Beowulf, in Beowulf, Herod is a great hall that is meant to be a drinking hall, a mead hall. It's where Hrothgar can sit on his high seat and can give out gifts to his people and share. It's a place that Sumbul can occur because it is enclosed in that space. It's a dedicated space for the community, and Sumbul is about the community, whereas Blot is about our relationship with the gods. And so that's a cool thing, and there's references to both. They can both exist within that space. It's just understanding the why of it. You know how important I feel the whys are. And that's the big thing. Why do you want this space? What do you want to use it for? If you're wanting to open up to the public. Well, why do you want to open up to the public? Is it because you want to build community? Or is it because you want to include all of these unknown people in your rituals and bear your ritual space to the world? I'm betting it's the first one. I'm betting the reason that you want a Hof is because you want to be able to share space with others, other heathens, and do, heatheny things within a community center kind of space. I could be wrong. As far as other tribes having a space to come and do ritual, that's not my tribe's responsibility to set up their space for them to do ritual. It would be somewhat disingenuous to use our space for their rituals when this is charged with our tribal energies. They need their own space. They need to figure out what their space is going to be. Because not everything was internal as far as inside a house. There's a lot of references to groves, to sacred groves, sacred trees, things like that, so on and so on. And it's very real that people will want to do their rituals outside, where we're connected with the gods, where we're a part of that space. When you do a Hof internally, you really need to focus on the totem aspect, on the idols that are included, because those become your gateway to the divine. You create that anchor point that is the through point to access the gods and goddesses, that focal point to bring that sacred energy in to that space. There's a lot of benefits to using a Hof as far as having hard set boundaries, a good space to catch those energies, to kind of turn it into a sacred oven, as it were, where you can sit there and bake in sacred energies. Groovy stuff, like it. There's a lot to being out in the wild, in a grove, a vey with a hogr, which is a stone altar, and connecting to the gods out in the wild open. I would like to be able to do both, ultimately. Financially, it's a catch thing. Financially, it is definitely more difficult to go out and try and do both, to try and set up both spaces. To try and be able to set up both a Hof and a hall would also be financially very taxing. So if you're looking at doing something like that, these are simply my reasons why I would give the advice of focus on ritual space being for your tribe, kindred, hearth, whatever. Community center kind of things you could open up if you wanted to. You can still do a great hall and just dedicate it to the purpose of your community, and that's fine. That's honestly probably better in a lot of ways, and then you can invite people in the community into your hall and share your hospitality and things like that. Get your Rothgar on, as it were, and share with the people that way. It's a spectrum of things. You have options all over the place. Now, I realize that like 98% of you guys out there are like me, and financially it's unviable to do any of that at the moment. You don't need any of that. You don't have to have a Hof. You don't have to have a hall. For a while there, we did our large rituals in a rented space, a rented internal space that we dedicated to the purpose, came in, did the wards, all that setup stuff. And that's how we did like the High Feast of Yule and stuff like that when we were inviting in outside people, doing our version of open, where we had invitees that we brought in. That's where we did that. And it worked just fine. It was really good because we dedicated that space to that purpose while we were there. Is it as effective as an ongoing anchored Hof? No. But at the time, our then chieftain had a space set up that was dedicated as a Hof inside his home, and we did our smaller tribal stuff there. Then when I took over and got my Hof and my vey and everything set up out here, we utilized my vey very heavily. And then, of course, we'll use the inside spaces sometimes when the weather just is not cooperating. So anyway, I'm rambling on and on and on, but as you can see, this isn't just a simple thing. A lot of people that are like, yeah, we need a public space to gather. I don't know if they're necessarily thinking it through all the way. I don't know if they're necessarily dividing the whole community aspect from the religious aspect, because they are very separate things. And I feel like they need to be. Now, other people will have other opinions. That's your hall, your call. Not my hall, not my call. But I'm one that's very much on the side of the religious needs to stay insular. Not because you're trying to exclude people that you don't feel can be heathen and can worship the gods, but because you need to guard your luck. You need to guard your inengar. You need to guard your well. And you cannot do that in an open setting. It's like, I don't do my rituals out in public settings. I've been asked before if I do rituals out at my park moots and things like that. No, I do not, because I don't do ritual with the public. I don't go in and do rituals for people that I don't know, and I don't share weird on that level with people that I don't know. I'm not really interested in opening up the well to that extent. Too big a risk. So, I do not do rituals at my East Texas Heathens Park moots, and I won't. I have no intention of doing that. We don't do sumble, we don't do bloat, we don't do that. Plus, we're out in a public park, and there's way too many variables that can taint and ruin a ritual in that kind of a setting. It needs to be far more controlled, because what we're doing is far too important. Folks that open it up to the public, I think maybe are missing some of the importance of what they're doing and why it needs to be as guarded as it needs to be. Again, these are simply my views. You guys will have your own personal views, and I'm sure some people will disagree with me. That's fine. Your call, your call. If you're interested in where I stand on it, that's where I stand on it. So I won't belabor the point anymore, but let me know in the comments what you guys think. Jump on Word Weaver Productions, like the page, join the community over at Word Weaver Productions community, and join in the conversation. I would love to hear what you guys have to say, and I'd love to see where you guys go with it and what you think. Again, there's a difference between a great hall and a Hof, so keep that in mind as you make your plans, all right? As you decide what it is you need to better provide for your tribe and for your kindreds and for your hearth. Do you really need a hall? Do you really need a Hof? Could you dedicate a room in the house? Could you get one of those rent-to-own sheds that you can stick out there on the property and turn into a Hof? Do you really want the public coming into that? Think these things through and decide what it is you need. Understand your whys. And as long as you're cool with your why, then you're good to do whatever you want to do. You will just, please don't be offended if there are individuals like me, because there are a number of individuals like me that would not use a public Hof type setting because we don't feel it's appropriate, especially in our interactions with the gods and goddesses. So make of that what you will. And in the meantime, hope you guys continue to have a fantastic day. And hail to you all. Thank you. May your hearth fires burn bright. Don't forget about the clicker. Coffee. Oh, man. I think I got the mic on here, right? Sure, that was loud. Oh, it's been crazy. I've had like 0.00 studio time lately. It has been ridiculous. My work has been upside down, left, right, and just ridiculous. So, I have no recording time. And as such, I'm having to make do where I can. And today, that means shooting in the wild. Hogwarts Harry Potter fan, gotta love it. Ravenclaw all the way. Wouldn't have guessed it, would you? It's kind of obvious, I know, but still. All right, this is going to be the Hof versus Hall thing. And I am not exactly well put together today. It's been, like I said, it's been crazy. So I'm coming back from work, and I haven't even, settled into the house yet. But I needed to get this fired off. We'll see how that goes. So I've got to get this filmed, and then my battery charged before my interview here in a little bit. So we're going to see how that goes. All right. So without any further ado, let's jump in 3, 2, 1. Let's jam. I got to give a shout out on this. Oh, shoot. Pause. Go back to before any further ado. 3, 2. I forgot something, and I kind of need to bring it up. So we're live, and
Coffee is gold. Love my coffee.
All right, ready? And 3, 2, 1, let's jam. The important thing is understanding why you need the space, and how much space you need, etc., etc., etc. Now, for these specific purposes of drinking, of sharing community, of sharing time, etc., 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 pause. No etceteras. While I'm paused, Twyla's gotten on to me for overusing etc., and she is right. So I'm like starting to count them myself. I'm like, I overuse etc. I need a different expression there. So I'm working on it. So we're going to go back, and we're just going to redo the whole thing. And we're in 3, 2, 1. Let's jam. Trees. There's a lot of focus on trees throughout lore and throughout, the sagas, etc., etc. Pause, go back, get rid of the etceteras. See, I'm still doing it. I'm still catching it. I'm trying to get it out of there. All right. 3, 2, 1. Let's jam.